Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drilldown. We have lies upon lies upon lies upon lies. And even by Washington, D.C. standards, these are some serious whoppers. We're going to unpack them today with Eric Eggers. Who better to talk about lying than my co-host, Eric Eggers?
I actually received that with affirmation and affection, Peter Schweizer. Thank you very much. It is crazy. I think that's been a common theme that we've discussed over the last several years in terms of what the Biden administration and the media who cover them thought they could get away with. It reminds me very much of the old Saturday Night Live character that John Lovett played, the liar. He's like, yeah, he's totally fine. Yeah, that's the ticket.
In fact, I won the Pulitzer Prize that year. Yeah, that's a ticket. And then Mike Tyson.
Well, they were mumbling that statement in the corridors of the White House over the last 4 years, and they were getting plenty of support from the media. And the reason this is so interesting, of course, is that we had, of course, the material that's come out about Joe Biden's situation, how bad it really was in terms of his cognitive ability. That's the new Jake Tapper book that's out. Now comes out word that shockingly, prostate cancer just emerged almost immediately in Joe Biden, of course, raising questions about what they knew and when they knew it. So tell me, what to you is the most shocking thing about this? The fact that Jake Tapper is now trying to lead this parade, or the fact that none of the news media wants to take any account for any of this?
Yeah, I think there's so many different elements to unpack. So that's why I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. There clearly was a serial underreporting of real scandals in the Biden administration.
That's generous, by the way. Underreporting?
And I would
was
say,
there any reporting?
And I would say that's why that makes you a perfect person to talk about this, because you are very familiar with things being underreported or ignored that should have been scandalous under a Biden presidency. To me, let's just start with this. Mm-hmm. You have the former president of the United States, a man in his 80s, come out and release a statement about his health. Yeah. And he says it's a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. And
it's in his bones.
And it's
advanced.
Right, and it's advanced. And the collective reaction of the country is like, I'm not sure I believe you. Or it's like, yeah, okay, I believe you, but why are you releasing it now? As Axios put it in a headline, Biden cancer news treated with sympathy and suspicion. And that's because of, as you noted, we're like literally today, this book written by Jake Tapper, and we'll talk about his value or capacity as the messenger of this in a little bit. They're talking about the original sin, how the Bidens worked to cover up a number of problems, specifically their cognitive decline. And so the prostate cancer just is a little too even on the nose, because you even have Morning Joe having your good friend Zeke Emanuel on saying, listen, you can say that you have prostate cancer now, but if you have it now and it's stage 9, Peter Schweizer, what does that mean?
It means you've had it for a while. Probably 5 years is what people are saying.
Meaning he would have had it as president of the United States and not have disclosed it.
Yeah, and here's what I would say, by the way, is people are generally cynical about Washington, D.C. and truth-telling, and they understand that, both political parties do this. They cook the books. They introduce a bill and they say, oh, this is actually not going to increase the debt when it actually does. Or they make claims about what their opponents are doing that are not entirely accurate. They realize that is sort of rank and form, the normal stuff that goes on in Washington, D.C., the lying. This is on a higher level. This is on a level of your personal medical condition. It's not open to interpretation, right? It's not open to debate. You either have prostate cancer or you don't, and you choose not to share it with the American people. It's hard for me to find a recent example that would anger and make people more cynical than this. I think back to the whole Bill Clinton about I did not have sex with that woman. And then they had a debate about what was sex and all of that. You could look at policy things like George H.W. Bush saying, I will not, read my lips, I will not raise taxes. But this to me is even more profound because you're talking about the cognitive function and ability of the leader of the free world to operate, and they're not being honest with the American people. So to me, this is a category of lie that is enormous.
Again, Zeke, you're an oncologist, obviously incredibly respected. you believe that it is likely, just for those just tuning in, you believe it is likely if this prostate cancer has spread to the bone that he could have had it for up to a decade, but certainly it's likely. Would it be fair to say it's likely to have had this for at least several years?
Oh, more than several years. You don't get prostate cancer.
So I just want to stop you. So this is not speculation. If you have prostate cancer that is spread to the bone, then he's most certainly, you are saying, had it when he was president of the United States.
Oh, yeah. He did not develop it in the last 100, 200 days. He had it while he was president. He probably had it at the start of his presidency in 2021. Yes, that I don't think there's any disagreement about that.
So that is Zeke Emanuel, the man who helped write Obamacare, essentially, and
a doctor,
a medical doctor, a significant medical expert. Here's somebody else weighing in on this issue who's got slightly less medical expertise.
To everybody, but it's given just about, and it takes a long time to get to that situation. Now, I think, to get to a stage 9, I think that if you take a look, it's the same doctor that said that Joe was cognitively fine. There was nothing wrong with him. Well, he said, if it's the same doctor, he said there was nothing wrong there, and that's being proven to be a sad situation. There are things going on that the public wasn't informed, and I think somebody's going to have to speak to his doctor. If it's the same, or even if it's two separate doctors, why wasn't the cognitive ability, why wasn't that discussed?
So, I mean, that's Donald Trump, I think, kind of nailing the discussion that most Americans are wrestling with. So you break the news about your prostate cancer. Do you break that news partly because you're trying to blunt the impending criticism over what else you didn't disclose as it relates to cognitive decline? The authors of the book, Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, gave an interview with The New Yorker. And listen to this. I did not know this, and I think this is just another interesting factoid as it relates to the context of what the Bidens hid and what they knew and when they knew it and all that. So you talk about not disclosing medical issues. This would not be, whether it's the prostate cancer or the cognitive decline, this would not be the first time the Bidens have withheld sensitive medical information. Alex Thompson talks about how in the Biden's memoirs, they reveal, this is something that's happened over 10 years ago, that in the summer of 2013, Beau Biden was diagnosed, as Alex Thompson says, essentially with lethal brain cancer. He underwent brain surgery. It was a glioblastoma. They acknowledged that it was unlikely he was going to live. But then in February of 2014, as the sitting Attorney General of Delaware, he is given a clean bill of health with a year left on his term. Obviously, that was not an accurate diagnosis because he would die the next year. But the point of it is that Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper point out, some of it was for political reasons and some of it was internal denial. And as Jake Tapper says, he's the chief law enforcement officer of the state of Delaware, hiding the fact that he was debilitated. So this is, unfortunately, not the first time a Biden family member has failed to disclose or actively concealed relevant information from their constituents.
Yeah, and this is, by the way, the most relevant information that any voter should get from their elected officials is what is your actual health, your condition, your ability to perform the job. By the way, that Trump clip, I'm just imagining Trump as a doctor. Giving that kind of diagnosis,
it's not good.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But let's get to the I think the crux of this, which is the reason we're all talking about this in the way that we are. It's Jake Tapper's book, which comes out today as we are recording this podcast. And Jake Tapper is leading the charge with this book, sort of scolding the media, scolding the White House officials for hiding this fact. Let's listen to this montage, right, of Jake Tapper talking to people and their comments, Democrats basically defending what Joe Biden's situation is.
Yeah, so let's be very clear. So is Jake Tapper the right messenger for this topic, right? And the answer is almost universally no. And Jake Tapper seems to know this because it's been reported as part of the reporting of the build-up to this book. They're doing lots of media interviews. Jake Tapper has hired a PR crisis firm because he knows that bad stuff's coming, and we'll talk about his capacity to deal with bad stuff. But you've seen a lot of different pushback. I've heard you say the internet's real, and so people understand why Jake Tapper, like he's dismissed Laura Trump famously for trying to raise the cognitive decline.
Yeah.
But more than that, right? Forget about like dismissing a Trump attack on a political opponent's cognitive ability. In June 2024, before the debate happens, when everyone sort of saw what Joe Biden was, the Wall Street Journal ran an article that talked about how many Republicans talked about signs of his cognitive decline. Okay.
Yeah.
Jake Tapper, in response, did not have those reporters for the Wall Street Journal on. Mm-hmm. Instead, he chose to have Joe Biden's good friend, fellow senator from Delaware, the current senator from Delaware, Chris Coons, on, and listen to the way Jake Tapper introduces the story and then sets up Chris Coons for a response.
In our politics lead, the White House today vehemently pushing back on a new report on the president's age and mental acuity. The White House communications director posting that the story in the Wall Street Journal was a complete and utter editorial failure by the Wall Street Journal. Makes you wonder who they're taking orders from, unquote. Maybe that's an insinuation because the Wall Street Journal is owned by News Corp, which is run by the Murdochs. This is all in response to this headline today from the Journal. Quote, behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping, unquote. Beyond the headline, there is some critical nuance here. The article is mostly based on observations of Republicans, with former Speaker Kevin McCarthy the only one going on the record. The thrust of the article is this, quote, some who have worked with him, the president, including Democrats and some who have known him back to his time as vice president, described a president who appears slower now, someone who has both good moments and bad ones, unquote. Democratic Senator Patty Murray joined the White House in pushing back, saying she offered the Wall Street Journal on-the-record statements contradicting this narrative, she says, that were not included. Here to discuss is Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, a longtime friend and ally of President Biden. Senator Coons, thanks so much for joining us. So what's your response to the article? Surely you acknowledge that any 81-year-old seems a little slower than he did at, say, 61 or 71. That's just the aging process.
So what does that sound like to you? Somebody who's just, got Woodward and Bernstein-like instincts and really chasing the story? Yeah,
no, it's interesting to me because what he does is he actually criticizes fellow journalists, essentially saying the subtext is that, this is sloppy reporting, this is a partisan hit. And in order to confirm my thesis, I'm going to pick his best friend, Senator Coons from Delaware, to come on and explain why these reporters are inaccurate and wrong.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're wondering why the Wall Street Journal would probably only be informed by Republicans for this story, listen to what Democrats had been saying that year and the previous years publicly and presumably privately about Joe Biden.
Does the president have the stamina, physically and mentally, do you think, to continue on even after 2024?
Don, you're asking me this question. Oh my gosh, he's the president of the United States. I can't even keep up with him.
The most difficult part about a meeting with President Biden is preparing for it, because he is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
Joe Biden has vision, he has knowledge, he has a strategic thinker.
I, met with the president, 5 or 6 weeks ago, and he seemed fine to me.
I have seen a lot of 72-year-olds not as capable as this 80-year-old.
His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. He's fine. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
My favorite's got to be the Mayorkas quote where he says, you got to really be on your toes when you go into a meeting.
Well, and
come on.
Because, Joe Biden's clearly, as you heard him say, intensely probing. That I'm
thinking you got to be on your toes to keep him awake. That's probably what the real problem was. So yeah, this was a concerted effort. And look, we expect it from political allies and figures to do those sorts of things. We don't expect the mainstream media to ignore what is plain for everybody to see. I mean, everybody saw the videos. They claim that the videos were doctored. I mean, maybe there was some that people put out, but there were plenty that weren't. And it was pretty clear. But rather than believing their own eyes and asking questions, they called up their friends in the White House and said, hey, what about this issue? And rather than believing their own eyes, they believed what their friends in the White House were telling them. The question is, do you think that those relationships are shattered? I mean, these news reporters, if you went to Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and said, hey, how's he doing? He's doing great. He looks sharp. Or Mayorkas or Schumer saying, oh, this is just right-wing propaganda. He's terrific. Do you think reporters are going to now second guess what those people are saying? No. They're not. That's to me the tragedy. What is the real consequence, if any, that's going to come out of this?
Yeah, and you have an excellent point, which we'll get to very shortly, about the fact that they haven't learned their lesson because there's still a hard truth that they're still not telling. But to your point, and what some of the value, as ludicrous and comical as it might be, that Jake Tapper's out there trying to lead the parade, and the rest of these mainstream media outlets are reporting on the book as if it's a way to reclaim the mantle of journalistic integrity. Like if they report, it actually reminds me a lot of what happened with Clinton Cash, and we talked about that a few episodes ago. It's like if the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Atlantic, if they now report on this book, it's like they're reporting on the story again, or which they ignored for the first time. But some of the value from this book is saying, look, the circle of people who had access to the president shrank considerably at the end of 2023. So like Mike Donnellan, Steve Rigetti, Anthony Bernal, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, they said, you brief us, we'll brief him. So the circle became quite small, right, which I think is actually quite indicting of, among the other people, the Secretary of State for essentially helping to create and perpetuate this fabrication, which many people are rightly calling the greatest political scandal in American history.
Yeah, I think absolutely, especially in this day and age, right? We had a experience that was somewhat similar when Woodrow Wilson was president. He had a stroke in office that was kind of a cover-up. His wife, Edith, was responsible for running some of the affairs of state. But look, that was before television. That was before the mass media that we have now. It was before you had this large press corps. It's simply inexcusable. There's nothing, I think, in modern American political history that has been this massive of a cover-up. And the media, the legacy media, just sort of soldiers on. I mean, they without blinking, without questioning, without any sense of, you know what, we've got to really think deeply about how we're failing at our jobs. They're pretending like it didn't happen.
So one of the nuggets that's in this book that I like that speaks to the scandal of the lack of reporting on it is apparently you've got Bill Daley, the former chief of staff to Obama, is getting stressed out, and he's realizing
this is in
2023, I think.
2023,
and he's making phone calls. He's trying to get other Democrats to run in a primary against Joe Biden. Remember, I mean, who are the people that did actually step up and say, look, we think Joe Biden is maybe he's a great servant, maybe he's a great American. He's not going to be a great president until 2029, guys. So you have Dean Phillips, a congressman from Minnesota, and as Jake Tapper points out, he's been defenestrated. That's his word. Like, I mean, he was not treated kindly by the Democrats.
They smashed him.
They smashed him. You also had RFK, who was treated so well that he had to leave the party and join the Trump administration. Like, these are the people that say, hey, guys, I don't think this is it.
Yeah.
But you also had Bill Daley, and he's making phone calls. He calls J.B. Pritzker. He calls Gretchen Whitmer. And he calls Gavin Newsom and Andy Beshear, trying to get them to run in a primary, and nobody would do it because running against an incumbent, unless you're Ted Kennedy, is not a successful move for you long-term politically. Yeah. So there were some people out there that said, look, we think this is a scandal. We think this is no good. But they were largely dismissed and ignored. And you have, I think, a very telling insight as to why they were willing to let Joe Biden, to kind of risk it all with Joe Biden, because why? And this is the truth, and this is the thing that they're still lying about. Why were they? Why did everybody still go all in on Joe Biden?
Yeah, this is the big lie behind the big lie, right? And again, the media is not acknowledging this. I don't think Jake Tapper really acknowledges this. Is the reason that they had to prop this guy up? The reason we had to have weekends with Biden as opposed to weekends with Bernie is because Kamala Harris was so weak and so terrible, and they knew it. They knew it from the beginning. So they had to prop him up. They had to perpetuate this lie because they were covering up the other lie, which is how terrible she is. Because, of course, remember when Joe Biden did finally, after that disastrous debate, step down, Kamala Harris came, and they continued to lie about her. She would give these speeches, and they would applaud her on her clarity, how she was connecting with voters. We know based on this book that you found that came out at the beginning of last year in 2024 that was sort of a insider Democrat account. We know what Democrats in the White House actually felt about Kamala Harris, and what was that?
I may have found it, but you remembered it. So full credit to you. Like, look, there was a book that came out.
I couldn't remember the name or the authors, but
luckily that's what the internet's for. The book was called The Truce, and ironically, you have these two reporters that kind of tell the story of the fight for the 2020 nomination, and it's essentially how Joe Biden became this character to keep the different factions in the Democrat Party together.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was reported quite explicitly in this book, which came out in January of 2024, is about how the consensus began to emerge shortly after Biden takes office that he would have to run for a second term because of, quote, the fear that Harris could not win a race against Donald Trump or against any Republican. The authors write, Democrat after Democrat that we interviewed, including members of Biden and Harris's own teams, said, quote, Kamala's not ready for prime time. She ain't ready for this. They said she has a lack of discipline, lack of focus, lack of decisiveness. Some people called her a shallow narcissist for whom, quote, there's not that much there.
Yeah.
So this was the conventional wisdom after Biden takes office. And in that first year, many people are like, I mean, it did not go favorably. Kamala Harris was not viewed favorably by the Biden administration in terms of her role as vice president, which only then fueled the thinking that no matter what happens, Joe Biden has to run for a second term.
Yeah, and by the way, this book, it was not written by two right-wingers who hated Kamala Harris. These were two establishment reporters. The book was endorsed, I think, by people like Paul Begala and other Democrats, saying this is kind of the definitive insider account. So this is what Democrats themselves knew in January of 2024, which was he's going to run. It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what condition he's in. He's going to have to run because even Joe Biden in this diminished state is going to be better than she will with her full capacity.
The book details an administration as vice president with a lot of heavy staff turnover, what they call a toxic climate. And this is maybe the most damning quote from the book. Quote, a lot of us, at least folks I was friends with on the campaign, all realized, yeah, this person should not be president of the United States. So that's, but then that's what you're looking at, right? And you're looking at, okay, this is the vice president now. So if Joe Biden's going to get out, and one of my other favorite quotes from this book, by the way, comes from Bernie Sanders, who in that supercut we played a little bit ago, I love Bernie Sanders. Like, yeah, I met with Joe Biden. He was fine. It's like Gus Meyer was like, dang, guys, he's like crushing me at Sudoku. Bernie Sanders like, but Bernie Sanders says the struggle for America is the need to bring together the working class, low income people in this country. It is not identity politics. All right. It's not seeing that a black woman goes to the moon. That's what Bernie Sanders says.
Yeah.
Ironically, if you go to the Kennedy Space Center, as I did last year on a field trip with my son, one of the things they tout is their plan to send the first black woman to the moon. So
so you're proposing Bernie Sanders for NASA administrator.
What I'm saying is that Bernie Sanders' vision for what is correct about the Democratic Party is not what the conventional wisdom was, because the reason why they let Kamala Harris ascend to become the nominee after Joe Biden withdraws is essentially because she's an African-American woman.
Yeah.
And they said there was no way anyone was going to usurp her.
Yeah. So let's remember, this, I think, is the heart of the reason why they were covering up for Joe Biden. The mainstream media and the people in the White House. Sure, the people in the White House had a connection to Biden. They liked him. They'd been with him for a long time. But it was this larger political purpose. And I think it's the same thing with the mainstream media. They did not cover his cognitive decline. Also, they didn't run a lot of those stories from Democrats saying how unprepared Kamala Harris would be. So that's where you get the lie upon the lie upon the lie. And that's what I think makes this one of the biggest journalistic scandals in American political history, if not the largest.
It's a scandal because no one would stand up and say it. They wouldn't say, number one, Joe Biden's had cognitive decline. Number two, they wouldn't stand up and say, wait, you're now elevating this person who, generally speaking, everyone thinks is not ready for this.
Right.
And in fact, as they now report, and this is, to me, it was indicted, I think it was Alex Thompson who said this, they said, quote, it's funny that our book's title is Original Sin, because a few senior Biden people said, well, you know, the original sin actually was picking Kamala Harris.
Ooh.
They said Joe Biden wanted to pick Gretchen Whitmer, but because it was the summer of 2020, which we will discuss, we're in the 5-year removed from the summer of 2020, the political case after the murder of George Floyd by a policeman was made by a number of Biden insiders that said you need to pick a black woman because of what was happening in the country in the aftermath of the George Floyd riots. So, I mean, it's crazy to think that that is among the legacies of the summer of BLM and George Floyd, is that that's essentially what locks in Kamala Harris's position as vice presidential nominee, even though Joe Biden wanted to go in a different direction.
Yeah, and think about this. The sort of identity politics that they want to impose on the rest of us is what ends up really biting them in the end. the choice that they made. So I asked early in the podcast, and in conclusion, I want to give the answer. Is there going to be a consequence for this? Is this going to hurt Jake Tapper? Is this going to hurt the other news reporters? Is this going to hurt those political fixers that worked in the Biden White House who lied blatantly to journalists? Is this going to hurt Chuck Schumer or any of these people? Is there going to be any consequence in the culture of Washington, D.C.? I think in larger America, a lot of people are scratching their heads and are angry. But is this going to hurt them in Washington, D.C. at all?
Well, it's a weird thing to say because these days, pulling a Bill Belichick can mean different things to different people, but
yeah,
in whatever way you want. No, but Chuck Schumer, in this context, what I mean is that, you know, Bill Belichick famously said, well, we're on to Cincinnati.
You think having a 37-year-old... We're on to Cincinnati. It's nothing about the past, nothing about the future. It's right now we're preparing for Cincinnati. Okay, do you feel like the talent you have here is good enough? We're getting ready for Cincinnati.
They kept trying to ask him, like, what happened in this last game? You guys lost the game. He's like, we're on to Cincinnati. We're on to Cincinnati. And Chuck Schumer is essentially trying to do that. He's like, we're focused on the future. We're not going back to say it. I am a little interested to see how Jake Tapper does, because as it's been reported, and you have some experience with this, he's not known as having the thickest skin.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, some people said that, quote, here's a quote from The Spectator, Jake Tapper is known as one of the most thin-skinned little man babies in Washington, and it takes a lot of work to build that kind of reputation in a city full of thin-skinned little man babies.
Yeah.
He's known as somebody who, if he doesn't like something you've said, will reach out to you directly. You have some experience with this.
Yeah, no, I mean, he actually reached out to me via text in 2017, and he was upset because I had retweeted an article that he claimed was inaccurately reporting something that he had said, and then we continued to text occasionally on various matters. But yeah, anytime there was something that I said, particularly related to him, that he did not like, he was quick to jump on the text. And I kept thinking, this guy's got a TV show, he's writing novels, he's writing nonfiction books. Why is he taking the time to text with me? Turns out he's doing that with a lot of people, and he's very concerned about his image. I don't know how his reputation comes back from this, but I'll tell you, I think CNN's all in. I don't think Jake Tapper's going anywhere. He's going to be on CNN. I don't think he's going to suffer a consequence among his colleagues. And I don't think any of these political figures are going to really face any sizable consequence for what they've done, which to me is truly outrageous. Again, I get it. People are going to lie about policy. No. Your taxes are actually going to be lower with our bill. I get that. But when you're talking about something as simple and as black and white and as profound as your health, your ability to actually do a job, and you lie about it and you cover it up, to me, you should get the death penalty as far as your political career is concerned.
Well, Jake Tapper is definitely going to get his feelings hurt because there's a lot that's being said about him by, I think, like mainstream normal reporters who even them like, sir, this is egregious. Come on. We all like to pretend certain things that we did it all during the campaign, but come on, bro. You can't be out here acting like you're now going to be this fearless truth teller. And even his publisher and the media strategy they've taken has changed somewhat. He now is saying he looks back on his reporting with some humility, could have done a better job. But yeah, I think that there will be, I mean, the ultimate consequence for all these people on the left is that they have to live under a Donald Trump presidency.
Yeah.
And I give people
They don't like that.
They don't like that. And I give people like Mark Halperin, who's got a new podcast, who does a great job, credit for saying you cannot cover the Trump administration, which deserves all the scrutiny and coverage it should receive. Honestly, until you are honest about what you let go over the last several years. And I think that's why the story matters. It's a massive scandal in the fact that you've got a reporter who was as guilty as anyone of the original sin of looking the other way while the scandal was playing out in real time, pretending to now be the one that deserves to tell that story only adds to it, which is why I think it's such a great story for us to be able to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you as always taking the time to listen to this podcast. We know your time is valuable. You can find out more about our research at thedrilldown.com. And of course, please subscribe to this podcast, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are located. Thanks again. Until next time.